Welcome to Old Path in our study through the Old Testament book of Proverbs. We are currently at chapter 6, and we'll get through 6 and 7 today. And I want to make mention of a couple of things real quick before we start. I've been making the announcement over the last several weeks about our trips that we have planned. One that's going to the Grand Staircase, an expanded version of the Genesis view of what happened in the flood and how it pertains to not only the Grand Canyon, but a much larger bit of what happened during the flood that's known as the Grand Staircase. It encompasses, I believe, 4 days, and it's going to cover parts of not only Arizona, but Utah as well. And if you'd like some details on that, then contact us through the ministry's website, oldpaththeology.net. and send me an email. I can get you the details. Also, when it comes to the Israel trip, we have planned, this one's different than any of the ones we've done to this point because it's an additional day, and we're going to look at some of the more current historical matters that pertain to the nation since it came back into the land as its own sovereign nation again in 1948. And so we've added a day so we can look at some of the locations around Tel Aviv. So it's 11 days actual touring. In addition to that, there is travel time to get us there and back. So the whole thing, I believe, is 13 days with travel. But given the circumstances and the situations that have been happening over the last couple of weeks, and in the last week in particular in the north with a ceasefire that's taking place with Lebanon and with Hezbollah, there is the real possibility that our trip that we had planned departing on the 10th of March next year may very well be able to go. And so if you're interested in it, I've got all the details on it. Of course, it assumes a number of things. Of course, security, that the ceasefire is still in place, that there are no hostilities in the north. All of that is a given. I wouldn't want to be going up there any other way. I don't want to have to cut large portions of our trip out or do them under the concern that we may not be able to complete them. So we wouldn't want to go there unless we had confidence that that the trip could go as normal. So if you're interested in that, once again, it really is a life-changing kind of a trip. Both of the trips that I've mentioned, the one to the Grand Staircase and the one to Israel, are biblically focused, and so they're done with the intention of learning with your eyes what the Scripture teaches in writing. And so as far as the Grand Staircase, that's put together by my friend Russ Miller, and it is definitely worth going. I've been on it once before, and it is really an eye-opening trip. Israel is its own separate thing. There's nothing quite like it. Even if you go to other biblical tours that go through Greece and the 7 churches and places where Paul would have been, those types of things, they're fascinating. There's no question about it, but they are not Israel. That is its own category all by itself. So if you've never had a chance to be there, once again, since I'm going to be heading the trip up, it is our own itinerary. It wasn't put together for us. It's all the locations that we want to go to. And based on the number of times that I've been there, cutting out some things, but adding in other things. So it's a unique trip. And hopefully if you're interested in going, once again, I wouldn't go if I felt in any way unsafe. I don't have a death wish. I plan to go, and I plan to come home as well. So I wouldn't put myself in harm's way knowingly. So anyway, if that's something that you have interest in, we'd love to have you come along with us. And I have all the details on it, and would love to share that with you, the full itinerary of every place that we will be. And if time ever permits, we do add things in if time permits, but we keep a pretty busy schedule. So we are very much looking to go this time, and hopefully everything will work out as we had hoped. And we can get there for 2025, starting again March the 10th. So contact me if you, again, have any questions on that at oldpaththeology.net. And I'd love to get a chance to tell you about it and get you there if you're interested in going. So Proverbs chapter 6 and 7, you're going to find that there are some familiar things in this. As I've been saying all along, it's going to be that as we progress our way through the book of Proverbs, we're going to find a repetition in it that means that we'll probably spend a little bit less time on those topics than we did previously, because again, I don't want to get stuck in the place of redundancy where people become, just kind of tuning out of the book of Proverbs. So I want to highlight the things that are kind of unique to it. And we'll go through, we'll still mention the importance of it in case a person just watching this for the first time, but please go back and watch them as a whole. And it really is why we do Bible study the way that we do. And that is every chapter, every verse, every book until we're completed. Start at chapter 1, verse 1 of whatever book it is until we complete it. And that is so that we get an understanding of the entirety of the text and how it might relate to other books of the Bible. Topically, going through the Bible will not provide this for you. So it's important to me on a personal level. It's how I was taught, and it's the way that it's the only way I've ever known about conducting ourselves in our study of the Bible. We just go through it in its entirety. So we find ourselves in the book of Proverbs at Proverbs 6. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll dive into the text. Father, we thank you so much once again for your word, and for the privilege that we have put before us to study and to learn. We would ask, Lord, that you would give us the ability to comprehend the importance of what we see here, putting it into its proper historical concepts and understandings, and then making the proper application to our days as your church. So we ask, Lord, that you would lead us and guide us in the study of your word, and that it would become alive to our hearing. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, in chapter 6, let me make sure I mentioned something here. You're going to find that Solomon, when it comes to the actual participants or first persons in this, we know who Solomon is. We don't know for sure who his direct audience is. He just refers to as my son. Other times it's to younger men. We would think it's kind of more that expanded audience, but we don't have names. So we can at least understand that he's not trying to write this to young women. He's writing it to younger men. Now, that doesn't mean, and I'll be repeating this all the way through, it doesn't mean that the principles that are taught here don't have relevance to women. You could actually change out the genders, and this could be taught from a woman to younger women. And we find that that is really in keeping with what Paul wanted to see taking place in the church. You have two books really that are very much dedicated to the conduct of how things ought to be done in a church. The book of Titus and the book of 1 Timothy really, they concern themselves very much with an elder pastor giving younger pastors details about here's how you want to see conduct going in your churches. And here's how you find people for leadership, and he has all these qualifications that are there. In Titus in particular, but you also find it there in Timothy, there is the real desire that Paul wants to see in the church, that the people with the greater amount of experience and wisdom and years and all the things that come along with that the older people would pass that knowledge and information and the wisdom that's gained from it to the younger generation so that they could learn as well. And so, again, as far as learning is concerned, having firsthand knowledge of it, because you've had to go through it, is obviously a very good thing. But I am very thankful for those people that I've met over the years who've been through things before, and they can tell me the pitfalls and the things to avoid. I don't mind learning from someone who's been through it before if it will help me to avoid having to learn things the hard way as maybe some of them did. So there is a real wisdom that is attached to this, and there's a reason why he says the things that he says. So just really good for us to have a good reckoning and a good understanding of that. And so when it comes to this person that he is talking about, let's remember something, especially when it pertains to Proverbs 6. There's nobody that he mentions as having in mind, because it's said in the very general sense. Not necessarily to a specific young man that he has picked out, let's say, by name, but the specifics of this to each individual, whenever they read this, then it becomes very much personal. It's as though Solomon's speaking directly to them. And then the people that may be in their circle of friends or acquaintances or family or whatever else, this may have absolute direct application to them. And what you'll find in chapter 6 here, it starts in a very kind of a narrowed sense, but then it begins to broaden out a bit. And so these are things that are kind of I guess you could say characteristic. And what Solomon is trying to say to the young man, be careful of the people by their characteristics. And so the sixth here, proverb, is very much focused on that, of sizing up and recognizing the people that are close to you and your interaction, your involvement with them. You'll notice this is very much consistent throughout the entirety of these proverbs. The people that are of a lesser character, or that are of a compromised character, they are to be kept at arm's length. And the worse that they are, the more on guard you ought to be to make sure that you have no interaction with them on the personal level. And if we try to put it into a modern application, if we would say that, well, we've got to be able to evangelize the world. Of course we do. That doesn't mean that you have personal things going on with them. You don't back their loans, as it is here that he talks about in the first place. You don't interact and you don't partake in the things that they do. You can minister to them all day long, even if they're all the way up to your family and friends and people that are close to you. You can be a witness to them without participating in their sin and their rebellion. So those things are entirely different matters. We want to be able to reach the unsaved without question. Doesn't mean that we need to participate and interact with them in their sin. So there's a difference in those things, and we really need to make sure that we're very clear on the lines and the distinctions that are there. So going to family get-togethers and all the rest of it, of course you do. You just don't participate in the things that are not of a godly kind of a conduct. Things that the Bible would speak against, don't have any part of it. But be there with them. You have that common bond of them as family. Just be a witness to them. So those two things are related, but they are also disconnected in the idea of participation as opposed to being there and just a presence to them. And that goes for things in the world. The people that you know in business, or if you're just out and about and you're witnessing in the supermarket, you're not participating in anything. You're just out shopping just like they would be. So there's really not a problem with our interacting with the unsaved. Yes, someone needs to give them a reason why they can come to an understanding of Jesus, but we just don't participate in those things. That's what Proverbs is laying out here. You'll see it. It's very obvious. You just have nothing whatsoever to do with them. So that's carried through. In the New Testament, we find plenty of examples of that same kind of understanding there as well. So if we read, let's just read the first 5 verses, because it's kind of done in paragraphs and it expands into other things. But you'll find the common thread in this is about keeping yourself pure and free from the things that are being mentioned here. So in verse 1, my son, if you become surety for your friend, and if you have shaken hands in a pledge for a stranger, you are snared by the words of your mouth, and you are taken by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, to deliver yourself, for you have come into the hand of your friend. Go and humble yourself. Plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. So this is, of course, he's speaking about this as though it's happened after the fact. Now, to be a surety means that your friend has obligated himself to something. And if we want to just try to make it the most easy to understand, they have indebted themselves in some manner. They owe something to someone else. We think of it in modern days as far as loans, things that we've taken, and credit that's there. Now, a lot of times you're going to need something in the way of collateral. You can put up your own personal things, but in this case, this is like the co-signer, somebody who has said, I'll make sure and I'll guarantee what they've obligated themselves to. Well, it seems like a noble thing. We do it a lot of times with kids, and our children or whatnot will co-sign for their loans on various things. And of course, that's the things that we do with our kids. It's not really what's being dealt with here, though the principle of indebting yourself on behalf of another is, needless to say, not a great idea. Now, there are lots of people who will tell you you should never go into debt for anything, who also own houses and have mortgages, probably own a car or two as well. Those are things that you kind of say, if there's varying degrees of debt, those are things that you're just kind of, in that place. Mortgages are really kind of at the top of that list, because who can afford to buy a house for cash? But again, it's really not, we're going way beyond what was mentioned here. So it's, in case anybody's asking those kind of questions, how do we have modern application to this? there is personal debt that we may have, but this is the idea that you will put yourself in the place of surety, or giving a security to the person, this third party that has offered something to this friend or this acquaintance of yours that's in mind here. So what Solomon is saying, look, your own personal debt is not even being discussed here. It's when you give yourself in pledge to say, I'll make good on whatever obligation they've made for yourself. You'll put yourself out there in case for some reason they default. You're going to be on the hook for it. That's really ultimately what's here. And Solomon is saying, horrible idea, don't do it. So as we go through it, with that as the backdrop, if you become surety, now that means it didn't happen without your consent, you've consented to this. But if you become surety for your friend, and if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you are snared by the words of your mouth, and you are taken by the words of your mouth. So they can default on it. You're going to be the person that they come to next. So again, I mentioned that thing with kids. I've watched it happen a number of times, that parents will co-sign for a car or whatever else, and the kids just can't do it. Well, unfortunately, their parents are the ones who have collateral and cash and everything else. Now they're obligated to pay the pay off that rest of that loan. This is kind of the same idea, because you've actually, in this case, things were done more in the sense of a verbal, but for us, things are written out in contract form, and we sign those things. So it's you're obligating yourself for whatever someone else has obligated themselves to. You become party to it. And he's saying don't do it. Now, in fact, not only does he say not to do it, so he goes on to say this. So do this instead. If you've put yourself in that condition, my son, deliver yourself, for you have come into the hand of your friend. Now you've obligated yourself to something that you had no business obligating yourself to it. So he's pretty much at this point saying, if it's already taken place, then here's your next step. You've got to do something to correct it for your own well-being. For you have come into the hand of your friend. So here's what you do. Go and humble yourself. Let's kind of going before the person, kind of prostrate, and you're going to be groveling, that, let him trot over you is really kind of what the Hebrew is saying here. Give no sleep to your eyes. For you have come into the hand of your friend. Go and humble yourself and plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, and like the bird from the hand of the fowler. So he puts himself in that, you are in that same kind of mortal danger. And I think it's a bit hyperbolic, because not every single one of them is going to be, man, if they default on this, they're going to kill you. Instead, it's like, if there's a genuine fear that you will see in animals, gazelles, and birds when somebody's trying to entrap them, they do everything. They will move heaven and earth to get themselves away from that. Out of just simple fear and self-preservation, they are going to try to get away. Kind of the same thing. Solomon is saying to son, whoever this is, if you find yourself in this situation, in your mind, think the gazelle, think the bird. For sake of self-preservation, they do everything that they can possibly do to get away from the potential of what could be coming next. So this is the way that Proverbs 6 begins, by just saying, never put yourself and never obligate yourself on behalf of someone else when it comes to a creditor becoming surety. And that's, again, some people might read more into it than that. But as far as the surety that's mentioned here, the other places where it's mentioned, it's really kind of that thing. You've taken a pledge or an oath to do something. You will perform whatever it is that you've said you're going to do. If you've made that obligation and you've backed their play, as it were, then you've got to find a way to extricate yourself from it. Change whatever it is, go back to your friend, say either you get this thing paid off or you've got to go to the creditor, but you've got to get yourself out of this. And so that whole thing, then you don't have to worry about the potential. If your friend defaults, they're coming to you. Getting yourself out of those things is the counsel that Solomon gives here. Now, the people, that kind of the implication of this is the people that would put themselves in that position of getting loans and whatnot, and taking out, obligating themselves to things. This becomes more of a character issue, and it seems though they're not absolutely directly related, like he says, that friend of yours who tried to obligate you for their debt, they're also the people that he's referring to in verse 6, but you can see it might be people of the same kind of character. So the thought may just be kind of progressive. It goes from one stage to the next. A friend saying, hey, I want to buy this. I need to get this. Can I get you to vouch for me that it'll be repaid? And even in the case that you'll make good on it if for some reason I default. Who would agree to that is kind of crazy. But if this is somebody like that, they probably have some other characteristic things going along with it. If that's what Solomon's thinking in mind, you can see the next step of this, because look at what it says. And it runs through verse 11. I'll just read it all and then we'll go back. So go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider your ways and be wise, which, having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer, gathers her food in the harvest. Now, how long will you slumber, O sluggard? Will you rise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. So again, this is when we see these things in Proverbs, again, we're going to get to plenty of them, and most people in our minds, and I've mentioned this probably every week, when we think of Proverbs, we think the wise person does this, but the fool does that. And then you move on to the next thing. That's the most of the time what we think of with Proverbs. We're in the earlier part of the Proverbs, and you can see there's a real train of thought that goes on, in this case, in paragraph way. It begins by saying, don't indebt yourself on behalf of someone else. Now, if you're going to be speaking directly to people of kind of, sketchy character, people that these are people that are slothful, they're lazy. These are people who don't, they don't do anything, they're not motivated. And that's the kind of people that we're referring to here that Solomon has in mind. Now, when you see this word sluggard, in the Hebrew, it's used 14 times in the Old Testament, and every usage of it is found in Proverbs. It's not found anywhere else. So this particular term that Solomon's using here, it is unique to the book of Proverbs. And we can think of the person that it is. The sluggard that he's thinking about here is the person that's like, everything is tomorrow. I'll get to it. No big deal. There's no motivation to them. And he's using them as the ultimate extreme opposite of the ant in this case. And says, look, sluggard, if you want to kind of get a grip on what you should be doing, go take a look at how an ant functions the way that it functions, and you'll have a good understanding of how you should be conducting yourself. So he says, now go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Now, considering the ways is to recognize what they're doing, and then wisdom is to, in like manner, go and do likewise. And so what do? So having no captain, no overseer or ruler, there's no one giving them direction, telling them you must do this, you must do that. They provides her own supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. So then the question comes, how long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. These are all things that people who are kind of slothful, sedentary, just lazy and not doing what they're supposed to do, never get around to it. And so Solomon asks, when are you going to snap out of it? So if you watch the ant, theirs is perpetual motion. So and when we were kids, people had ant farms. I don't even think they sell those anymore. But kids used to have ant farms. And you could watch the way that they would do things. If you've never seen it, go look it up. But you used to be able to get them. They're just little plexiglass things with sand and whatnot. And you could see where the ants would burrow into it, and you could see it from both sides. It's just kind of interesting to see how they conducted their own lives and their own things, their own effects. Basically the same kind of a thing here. They're always doing something, and they're always storing up food and things for the times that they will need it. So again, there's just no slack in them. In this case, the total opposite is the person unnamed by name, but by the way that they conduct themselves, we all know people like this. And so he's saying to those people, consider the ant and how they do the things that they do. And then he asks very simply, he asks, so how long are you going to sleep? Sluggard, how long are you going to just put it off until tomorrow, when unlike the ant who never is caught by surprise, you're going to ultimately be caught by surprise. So shall your poverty come upon you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. So nobody's ready for the prowler. Nobody's ready for the armed man. And when you have need because you've not done anything to take care of it preemptively, it's going to come on you and you will be ill prepared. So again, when you hear that and when you read it and everything else, you go, this could not be more practical. It couldn't be more pragmatic, more, common sense. None of this stuff is stuff that you say, this is just so high-minded. It's, again, remember, he's using just real world kinds of examples. Go and take a look at the ant. Consider what it is that they do and how you're different from that. They're never going to be caught off guard. Even an ant who has nobody controlling it to tell it what to do is preparing for that eventuality that will happen, but they will never be taken off guard. Here, this person, he's asking, when are you going to get it together? Because the day's coming, you're going to never be prepared for it. Now, in verse 12, we have another paragraph that runs through verse 15. A worthless person, a wicked man, walks with a perverse mouth. And perverse here is used very commonly also in Proverbs, and it's the idea of crooked. It's devious. So, walks in a perverse mouth, with a perverse mouth. He winks with his eye, shuffles with his feet, he points with his fingers. Perversity is in his heart, same as what you see in verse 12. He devises evil continual, and he sows discord. Therefore, his calamity will come suddenly. Suddenly, he will be broken without remedy. What you have in verses 12 to 13 is really another way of saying what he has just said before this. And some of it is reminiscent of what we're going to read in the next section, because it then turns to, and these are things that God hates. God hates the things that lead to this kind of a mentality and the we'll get around to it tomorrow kind of a way of handling things. So notice how he puts it, a worthless person. And again, here's one of those places where when I read this, I always want to be mindful, if you will, of where we are in time here. The world and even us as individuals may look at a person who, with what they do in this world, have no worth because they don't produce anything. They're always, causing trouble for someone else, and a worthless person. They do nothing that benefits the larger whole of humanity. And we could say to society, this person has no worth. They have no value. And that may very well be true as far as the world is concerned. I never want to lose sight of the fact that God sees worth and value in each human, in that he loves them and wants them to come to him, that they could be saved and that they could be forgiven. And I do know this, a person who comes to that realization, if they were the sluggard or this person that's here, in modern times, if we know somebody who meets all of these criteria and characteristics, if they come to a genuine understanding of who God is, those things will begin to change, because God recreates the person from the inside and they start to see a whole different list of priorities. And it may not happen overnight, but it does happen eventually if they are genuinely tuned in to the God who saved them. Now, if they go ahead and make some statement that, I've come to know the Lord, but there's no change in their life, they're living a lie at that point. They can say whatever they want to, but there's no fruit of it. And, I don't want to get too far off on that. But a person that has been genuinely born again, take a look at the time from when they got saved and they pursue after the Lord. They give themselves and they dedicate to the time spent with the Lord. And what the Bible tells us, we're around fellow believers. Look at the book of Acts, chapters 2, 3, 4. You find how the church kind of worked among themselves and ministered to one another. And there was a real change that took place on the soulish the level, the most basic, part of a human being. They are just changed from the inside. And when they first walked into that relationship with the Lord to wherever they are at that time, you'll see that there's progress in that. So once again, the idea of, do we see things worthless as far as society and humanity is concerned? Let's never lose sight of the value that God puts on the human soul and his desire that they would be saved. That we know. He takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. So with that being said, A worthless person, a wicked man, verse 12, walks with a perverse mouth. Everything that they say is twisted and it's crooked. He winks with his eyes, he shuffles with his feet. This goes to that slothfulness, or that idea of just diversion, trying to work his way, getting whatever it is that he wants to, and not worrying about consequence. Perversity is in his heart. He devises evil continually. What an amazing thing. Everything in his mind, God would qualify it as evil, and that's what his mind is consumed with. Therefore, and it says he sows discord. That's going to show up in the next paragraph. Therefore, his calamity will come suddenly. Suddenly he will be broken and without remedy, which is an amazing thing. Kind of goes along that idea of the prowler and of the thief. And how they come upon you and you're not ready for it. There's nothing that you can do about it. There's no remedy. So when everything that you've done in your rejection of what God would want you to do, when it all catches up with you, there's nothing that can be done about it. It's going to happen because you've done nothing other than to feed it, and now it's coming to roost. And so we get, at this point, going right along with it, it goes to verses 16 to 19. 6 things the Lord hates, yes, 7 are an abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift to running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among the brethren. Now, there's 2 ways that people tend to look at this. It's 6 things that he says, and it's the 7th that is worse than all of them, that being the one that sows discord. I don't tend to believe that. I think this is just more of a poetic way, and you'll find other places in the Bible where a number will be given, and then yes, and then another number will be given. It's just more poetic. It's as though Solomon said there are 7 things that he's going to tell us that God hates. It's not 6, and this 7th one's worse than the rest. Some people believe that's what he means by that, and if he does, that's fine, doesn't matter. But you can look at the other ones, and I don't think that any one of them is more egregious than the others. But what they do is that they create such havoc in the mind and the heart of not only the person who is this way, but the destruction that comes from them. So it's why you notice that God hates these things. And the reason for his hatred of them is because of the collateral damage that happens because of it. And so the human toll that it takes. So let's look at these 7. They are mentioned again, verse 12. These 6 things the Lord, or verse 16 rather, I'm sorry. These 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination. So an abomination, again, when you look at those kind of things, abominations were worthy of death in the law. So if something was an abominable thing as far as God's concerned, go ahead and look up the word and find out what God says of something that is an abomination and what should be done as a result of it. So he says, yes, 7 are an abomination to him. The first one is a proud look. And this is the idea of self-pride and self-promotion to the point of pushing someone else down. It's that inflated self-image, and everything is about you and you-centered. Interestingly enough, this is kind of that we find this, and every generation has it. Clearly, 3,000 years ago, Solomon's writing about it. But boy, have you ever seen a more self-absorbed generation than what we have? And when I say generation, it doesn't mean just a particular age group, but the time in which we live. So things are so me-centered. And this goes, of course, beyond just that. Just being me-centered is not the beginning and the end of the problem. The proud look is that self-assessment, the looking down at others and that they're less than you. But we see a lot of it today, and of course, the world itself is trying to do that anyway, trying to make it all about you, and we become very much self-obsessed. So looking at how people spend so much of their time, social media is one of the worst places for this. Look at a kind of self-promotion that goes on there. But we understand the personality of the person who is so self-absorbed that they will have that own personal assessment of pride so much that they're just fine with the pushing down of another. And then it says the second would be a lying tongue, and this is just deceit, that there's just no truth left in them. So everything that they do is intended to work something to their benefit, and they don't care whether or not there's any truth to it, so long as it's of benefit to them. Again, with every one of these, I'll be able to just read them, and without giving a whole lot of description, you could probably start to think of either stories that are just currently in the news, or things that may have happened to you personally, or a person that fits this bill perfectly. It doesn't need a whole lot of explanation. You'll pretty much right away just go, yep, know exactly what that is. I can see it happening all around, maybe happening very close to you. Or you might be in the middle of something where you're dealing with either a person or the consequences of such a person and how it's affected you directly. And I do want to remember something. Each one of these people who do these kind of things, from Solomon's time forward, and this is one of those things, if you look at it, you go, could this be talking about me? I don't know, look in a mirror and ask yourself the question, are these things being done? And if you look at it and you have the assessment and saying, man, I really infringe on about half of these things, there's good and bad to that. First of all, the good part is that you are able to see it, and that means you can make it a matter of prayer and then pray that God helps you not to be that person again. The bad part is that you're doing those things, and the problem is it doesn't just affect you, but it affects the people around you. So yeah, it's very, very good for us to take a good long look in the mirror on a day-by-day basis and ask ourselves, do we live biblically? And the things that we do and say, do we do them biblically? So he says to the next one, hands that shed innocent blood. And this is the idea of murder. And kind of that's the, there are times that you would find that God calls his people to war, and that's not innocent blood in the same way of this, but the shedding of innocent blood. And the easiest in modern times to look at this and making application to our day and age, people love to look at this passage and they point right to abortion and say that's a prime example of what this is. And it does fit very nicely here. But again, remember, Solomon's writing this 3,000 years ago, and his primary audience is the people that are hearing his words. But that there were people who just had no problems. There was nothing internally that created a conflict for them where they had like no problems taking a life from someone. So the idea that goes on all the way back in his time, that's a character thing, and that's a person whose heart and mind is completely devoid of any kind of biblical or godly counsel. So just really, really a bad situation. So again, the idea of murder, and then the recognition that even when you think about it, when Jesus talked about if you will look at a person and have murder in your heart, meaning basically that there's no way for that person to ever be reconciled to you. They're as good as dead in my eyes. Let's remember that even in Jesus' words, we have to understand what it is, because there's just no way that you could have even, quote, murderous thoughts in your mind. Acting out on it is a whole different matter entirely. So it's not that Jesus is wrong. He's not contradicting the Bible. No, his point is get to the matter of the heart and settle that, because really, ultimately, nobody is born, quote, a murderer. They're going to step over that line at some point. His point is try to make sure that you check your own heart and mind, because if that's what you harbor in your mind, that, if it wasn't for the law, I'd probably just kill that person. That's a problem with you, and that's got to be fixed. I can be frustrated, I can be angry, and all the rest of it, but the idea that you get to the point where I have hatred in my heart for a person to the point of even murder, and there's nothing that I would do to forgive them and try to be reconciled to them, that's when things really step over a line. So he goes on to this, the person, the heart that divides wicked plans. And when we think about the heart itself, it's a good thing, of course, that he mentions the heart, because it's not just the actions, but it's got to be something that goes on the inside that starts to work on the outside. And again, when you start to hear people discuss this, one of the things that you find a great way of looking at it where it actually played out in succession, an unlikely guy, King David. Think about that. Bathsheba. So think about all of what he did when he made the initial mistake. Should have never even been in Jerusalem when it all happened. He should have been with the people as they were at war. That was normally the thing that he would do. Walks out onto his balcony, looks in the part of the city below him, sees Bathsheba. makes a point to find out who she is, to bring her to him. We know the rest of the story. And she conceives. He takes another man's wife. He does everything that's completely conceivably wrong. That was bad enough, and that was devised evil. He thought this through to get it to that point. Then she conceives. Now he's got a whole different group of problems. Joab becomes complicit in it. Her husband is going to die, and David sees to it, tries to, by guile, bring him back home, let him stay with her in the hopes that the pregnancy would be covered up and that it would be his child and not David's. And so look at the whole sordid thing, and it all takes a great deal of forethought. And remember, the person writing this, Solomon, is the son of David and Bathsheba. So whether he's even thinking along those lines when he says this, his dad was complicit in exactly everything that he sees here. So there was an evil plan that was hatched. And of course, when David was confronted with it, was repentant, knew what he had done was wrong, didn't try to cover it up. He owned up to what he had done, as horrible as it was. Modern days, it'd get you thrown in prison, but he's the king. But you get the point. So all of that had to have a calculation. What's my next step? How do I do this? How do I cover it up? Couldn't cover it up because the Uriah, the husband, was just a very a man of just great character. The people that serve with me and under me are in the thick of battle, and here I am. I'm not going to have anything to do with my wife. I should be with them. So David sees that's not going to work. That ploy is not going to work. So he sends him back to the front line and said, make sure you put him in a place that when he encounters the enemy, that he's dead. So I can get rid of the problem that way. The kind of calculation that went on. And then David having to get other people to be complicit in his cover-up just makes it that much more egregious. So this is a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift to run to evil. Whenever you see something that is bad, something evil that's going on, you're going to, instead of running the other way, you're going to want to jump right into the thick of it. And I remember watching all of the Antifa things and all the riots that happened in 2020, if you remember all those. And you could see the people that just wanted to be in part of it. Every single night they would show up at the same place when the sun went down, and they just wanted to destroy and wreck and pillage, and they wanted to just create havoc. Those are the people that come to mind. But again, you can find more ways or more examples than anybody could even hope to imagine in a lifetime. But you get the idea that if there's something evil, something bad that's going on, they want to be in the thick of it. So it says also, verse 19, a false witness who speaks lies. And this is in the way of testimony. It's different than just the ones that are mentioned a little bit earlier in verse 17 of being the lying tongue. That's a person that will do it for their own benefit. They'll lie about whatever if it benefits them. In this case, this is kind of more of giving testimony that will create a problem for the person. You're giving false testimony against them. Happened to Paul, happened to Jesus. We see examples of it all the time. They don't believe any of it. They say it just because it's a means to an end with them, and God hates that. So it says, and one who also sows discord among the brethren, which was dealt with in the previous paragraph that we just looked at. But the one who gets among the brethren, and of course Solomon's thinking about the nation, and so the people who have a common bond, the brethren. We see that this is something also that is talked about in the New Testament, same kind of thing. There is the whole of the world, the whole of humanity, but there is also within that, in the church sense, there are the fellow believers. In this case, there was the people that were of the commonwealth of the children of Israel, the sons of Jacob, the descendants of Abraham. They're in a different category altogether. But you would have those that would stir up whatever they can to cause discord and strife and problems among the congregation, the people of Israel, or in modern times, people that are in the church. God hates that because he sees its destructive and corrosive effect that it has on the rest of the collection of people. God hates those things. So once again, people really kind of initially, when you would say to some people, especially when they're younger in the faith, and may not know the scriptures too really all that well, and we teach kids to say, don't hate that. If you say you hate something, a kid says, I hate this, that, or the other thing, well, don't say that you hate. That's just kind of parents speaking about this, and the first thing that we comes to mind. Well, there are things that should be hated. And in this case, God hates these things as well. It doesn't say he hates the people, but he certainly hates the fallout of it. And so the people, God would love rather for them to come to an understanding of their wickedness and be forgiven of it. But in their case here, it's just a real problem with the people who do these things, and ultimately what ends up happening, it's more the fallout and the collateral that's in focus here, not as much the person, but the person who causes and what ends up happening, what's the cause of it, I should say. So he says this, and it's reminiscent to something he's already said before: keep your father's command, verse 20, and do not forsake the law of your mother. We've heard that same reckoning before. Bind them continually around your heart, tie them around your neck. That binding them to your heart is a little bit different than what we've seen before, but it's that idea of adornment. But his point is, let these things that you've heard, let them happen to you and be accepted on the soulish level, or of the heart, not just the intellect, not just those kind of things, but make them part of your being. And so the things that you've heard, bind them continually around your heart, tie them to your neck, and when you roam, they will lead you. When you sleep, they will keep you. And when you awake, they will speak with you. So that idea of constant counsel that comes along with it. For the commandment is a lamp, and the law is a light. Reproofs of instruction are the way of life. Very similar to what we saw in Psalm 119 in the earlier verses in that too. The idea that God's word or his direction is something that illuminates our path. So is this just Solomon using what he read from David in Psalm 119 and putting his own, putting it to his own words? It really has the same effect. For the commandment is a lamp. And that really takes into account, we should look back what he says, the things that he has heard from his mother and father. Now he talks about the command being a lamp. Does that mean he's looking back at his own words? Or is it because his own words are based upon what the scripture illuminates, and he's pointing back to that commandment or the commandments that you find as God instructs? I think that you can make the case that it's not an either or, but a both. So if the parents have very good godly counsel and wisdom passed along to their son, that is illuminating to them. If what they're teaching their son is something that is of a biblical importance and it's biblically structured, it's going to have that same effect. So a parent can just absolutely repeat what they know from the Word of God, passing it along to the son, and ultimately God is credited with that illumination that comes from it. It's not because it's something that's unique to them. They've just learned it because God said it to them first, and they're passing it along. That seems to be more in line with what he's saying here. It certainly fits as far as our understanding and biblical parent to younger, or older believer to younger believer, same thing. Whatever counsel we would give to them has to be first and foremost at all times. If it's going to be fruitful and useful and wise, it's going to be of a biblical origin, and we just pass it along. And that's what gives the illumination. It's not our words. So it says, verse 24, to keep you from the evil woman. And notice now he's turning back to this topic. And again, it's most of what we're going to get in Proverbs 7, which we'll probably leave to next week because I don't want to have to cut it short. We're running up against time. So it says, now, it will keep you from the evil woman, from the flattering tongue of a seductress. This is all very familiar. We've heard this before, and so it's just a repeat of some of the things that we've heard. Do not lust after her beauty in your heart, nor let her allure you with her eyelids. And so just that seductive part of it. But notice there is something that he mentions, that it is a matter of the heart, something that should be reminded. It's not just lustful thoughts and all the rest of that. That's something that you can see with your eyes and all the rest of it. But it's really the heart that sins. It's not anything else. It's going to be a matter of the heart that causes the things to happen. You have to agree to it in your own heart and mind to do. So it doesn't happen on its own. For by means of a harlot, a man is reduced to a crust of bread brought to poverty, and an adulteress will prey upon his precious life. It will that will be something that the end result of the time you have will be to your ruin. Can a man take fire to his bosom, or can you grab fire and bring it close to you, and his clothes not be burned? Can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be seared? These are obvious rhetorical questions. You can't get close to something that can do harm to you without being harmed. In this case, he's using things of intense heat. Fire is going to burn your clothes. Walking on coals is going to burn your feet. Getting close to someone who is immoral, you're going to have to suffer the consequences of that immorality because you've joined yourself to it. So it says, so is he who goes into the neighbor's wife, and whoever touches her will not be innocent. There's no way you can plead ignorance or innocence in this. You're guilty of it the moment that you do that. People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he is starving, yet when he is found, he must restore sevenfold. He may have to give up to the substance of his own house. So there's always going to be a comeuppance, if you will, the word that people love to use, but there's always going to be a cost to actions, which is, of course, what he's getting at here. Yet, when he is found, he must restore sevenfold, and he will have to give all the substance up to the substance of his house. Whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding, because you're just not even taking into account what comes next. If you've done that, look at all the collateral that happens. Once again, who's a great example to Solomon? David. His mother and father are target example number one of this whole thing. He's able to look back at his own life and what brought life to him, and the people who participated in it are just exhibit A. So again, whether that's what he has in mind or not, you could say, no, he's just speaking more in the general sense, but the thing is, he has it in his own house. It's happened. So it says, whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding, and he who does not, or he who does so, destroys his own soul. Wounds and dishonors will he get, and his reproach will not be wiped away. So again, if he's thinking David, the reproach that he brought, of course, he could be made right before God. Nathan goes to him and explains the whole thing. You can see his reaction in Psalm 51. He was broken. If there was something that I could do to make this better, I would. But I can't. There's nothing that I can do to undo this. So, unfortunately, the collateral damage that happens down the road and the resulting effect of it, I believe that if you look through the life of David, go back and read it yourself as you read through Kings and Samuel, and watch what happens to him before and after that event, and watch how it affects him as a king in his own household. It affects his family, it affects his relationships, it affects everything. And he's never quite the same after that whole episode. You can see it just in the way that his life worked out. So his reproach will never be wiped away. Here we are 3,000 years ago, or 3,000 years later, still talking about it. Can't be wiped away. It can be forgiven, it can be settled, he can be made right before God. All of that took place, but the idea that you can't undo what's happened, it's going to have ramifications down the road. That's why we should think about things, any kind of sin, no matter what it is. Think about it before it's actually acted upon, because once it is, there's no way to undo it. Verse 34, for jealousy is a husband's fury, therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. So when that's found out, if you've engaged in something with someone else's wife, the husband is going to have to be somebody that you deal with. Again, as we look back at David, totally different thing, because the husband was gotten rid of. That was just part of the evil of what he had done. But as Solomon thinks of this part, in this bit of the application, you're going to have to deal with the jealous husband, and that's potentially in a personal sense, that may be some of the greatest concerns that you might have. He hasn't even touched on the spiritual aspect of it. Verse 35, he will accept no recompense, nor will he be appeased though you give him many gifts. So unlike the person that's stolen, they need to make it right and restore sevenfold what was taken. In this case, you can't give sevenfold for something like that, of violating someone else's marriage and violating the person with which you've engaged. So yeah, the idea of this, and I've seen it wreck so many people. And not only you read it, sometimes you have to counsel people like this, and there's just no going back. There's no changing what it was. Now, can God forgive, and can he heal, and can he, mend the damage done by it? Potentially. But more often than not, it has just grave consequence. So all of this stuff is said, this is what happens after the fact, but his reason for mentioning it is, we're telling you not to engage in it in the first place. But then at the same time, it's good to say, we're telling you not to do it, but then let's make sure that you understand the consequences potentially of what's coming afterward. So why engage in the first place? You can avoid all of those things down the road, plus the own personal torment. The idea of the sin that you've created against God, which he doesn't really even touch here. And I think that this could probably be just as important, and it is, I believe, just as important, because the relationship that we have with God is eternal. Whatever we have in the way of marriages is temporal for this life. So whatever the entanglements you may have person to person here in this life, they end here. But whatever you're doing that really creates a problem between you and the Lord, that has eternal consequence. And what we'd never want to have is this type of deep regret and sorrow and grief of something so, elemental and so elementary as to violate a marriage covenant in this case, not only for yourself, but the other person that you participate and for their spouse. So really, really heavy stuff that everybody should consider before you even entertain the thoughts. And that's really where Solomon has been going with this. Remember, he had said, remember what your mother and father have said and what they've told you. Even if they're not the perfect examples, clearly they're not, but just remember again, Solomon's saying this stuff, and Solomon saw some stuff and didn't make the best of choices himself, but it's not the person that's saying them necessarily, because you can find people that have really created some problems for themselves, and God has brought them through it. So it's good to take heed to those things, but also at the same time, look through the wreckage of what's being spoken of and realize that there are real consequences potentially to actions. And those should all be taken into account before you even step foot. So we'll pick up, I had intended to get to Proverbs 7, but 6 had a lot of stuff in it that was kind of unique. And I don't want to rush through things just because I kind of had it on my schedule. But we'll pick up at Proverbs 7 next week. And if you have any questions about anything that's been shared or about the trips that I mentioned earlier, whatever that may be, you can contact me through oldpaththeology.net. That's our website. Anything pertaining to this ministry, you can do that through oldpaththeology.net. Some people who may actually look at the church that sent us out, and from where I came, I should say, has now changed the name of the church back to Calvary Chapel of Cyprus. We're still on the same terms. They've just had a change in the name of the actual church because it's in Southern California. Calvary Chapel is a known, commodity, and that was decisions that they had made. So everything's really the same other than the name of the church. So with that, we'll pick up at Proverbs chapter 7 next week.